Hey guys, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
That's right.
We're hopefully back on this week. We had a technical difficulty last week, which was too bad because I hope you guys listened anyway because Kat Calvin is such a great guest. And
Yeah, and I think it ultimately, you know, sounded still
it's
better than some podcasts that aren't
so
having
true.
technical difficulties somehow or another.
Exactly. But so hopefully you enjoyed that and we can have her on again soon. Happy MLK Day.
Yes.
And also happy day celebrating somebody who was in the really for all eternity because of his writings a socialist.
I know. I feel like many years I sort of like I feel like we sort of like always hint at it, but I also feel like in many years I'm kind of like I'm not gonna tell I'm not the one to tell people what people's lasting memory of MLK should be, right? Because that's not for me to say. And I'm not saying that your lasting memory should be that he's a socialist, but I am this year feeling like I'm going to at least remind you that he was, right? Like,
well, also, if you are somebody who is a person who would like to really respect the messages that MLK, is sort of remembered for, like, I think a sort of corollary to that is that he is someone that, like many people, believed that the kind of equality he was talking about also required some fundamental interventions from the government and changes in how we sort of conceive of the role of government. And that is something that you should think about if you are a person who also wants to think about what it takes to bring about sort of meaningful equality.
yeah, I agree. I would say if you're looking for something to do tomorrow, and look, we all are, because
We're
what are you
looking for
doing?
something to do every day
You're
because
stuck in
we're
your
in
home.
quarantine.
I
Right.
would I have maybe given this PSA before. I don't know, but there's
I
a
think you have.
great. I think I have to. I'll do it again because it's appropriate. It was probably MLK last year that I did the last time, but what are you going to
Yeah.
do? I'm sure we have thousands of new listeners that need to hear it again.
Obviously. Also, I will remind you that we go through Easter regardless of whether everyone's.
That's very true. We do.
So,
Right. There's a great movie, a documentary called King in the Wilderness, which is about the last years of his life after the I Have a Dream speech, when he really sort of like starts the Poor People's Campaign, starts to speak out against Vietnam. And it's interesting because a lot of his allies really weren't questioned him doing that, because the Poor People's Campaign was really about all poor people. He really started working with poor whites in Appalachia and various places and things like that, and also in the South. But it also sort of like covers that speech. The Riverside Church speech was when he really came out like vehemently against the Vietnam War, and tied that to being a very social justice issue, and that is all in that movie. And it's a lot of stuff that I do feel like is forgotten about MLK, because you learn about the I Have a Dream speech, and that's a great speech. But maybe this is the year to broaden your horizons on MLK,
right.
on MLK Day. Yeah.
No, if ever there was a year to think how productive part of social justice movements, it is a year when everyone is about to think we got rid of Trump so we can stop paying attention.
Right, exactly.
So,
yeah.
So I think this is a good time to be thinking to yourself, am I committed to my own comfort, or am I committed to social justice? And hopefully
Agreed.
you're committed to social justice and your own comfort. I think both probably go hand in hand. I have for a long time been saying I don't understand how people can't see that their like material conditions are directly related to the sort of our ability to provide justice to large swaths of society. Because I think we're all learning it kind of sucks to live in a place where no one has food or a job. And not
Bingo.
even if you have food or a job, it doesn't suck as much to have your entire community decimated. And your quality of life actually does improve when your whole community is not decimated, or other communities. So in any case, the other thing, we were trying to decide whether to come to you on Martin Luther today, Sunday, when we're recording this. And I think I was largely thinking, well, it depends on what is going on with the armed insurrections, because we thought today would be, it seems like, depending on who you talk to, the why this didn't pan out is a different answer. For example, if you talked to people on the far right, they tell you that this armed insurrection call was a false flag operation. left, they're like, probably they didn't want to deal with the thousands of National Guard troops that are at every state capital, and specifically in DC, which is like a militarized green zone right now. They have, I think right now they have 15,000 National Guards troops, but they're expecting to have 20 to 25 Wednesday, inauguration day. If you saw those pictures of National Guardsmen sleeping in the Capitol, then you, like us, were probably feeling weird, because as much as I was like, hey, let's not have anyone ransack the Capitol, I also don't want the Capitol to be a military state. So I have complicated feelings about all of this. I think
I was going to say, I was literally about to say, well, you'd rather see them there than the insurrectionists. And I'm like, well, maybe you wouldn't really rather see them.
I mean, I don't know who you would rather see
right?
there, and just see,
I don't want either of them there.
I want nobody to be involved in any of this. Right. I don't want them to have to keep anyone out or let anyone in. I want everyone to behave. So nobody can do anything weird. Also, though, they really did crack down on protesters getting on flights. Airbnb canceled all their reservations in the DC area for the week because they were just like, we're not trying to house insurrectionists.
And those videos of the snowflakes not being able to fly or getting pulled off of planes once they were already on are really, they're really like the heartwarming story of the week, I think. They really have just renewed my faith in the world. Seeing those people crying because they can't fly after they just committed a fucking terrorist act.
Also, though, well, I have two thoughts about this. One was, I think it is so, it's an example of how inexperienced these people are, that they thought that they were just going to like succeed at taking over the government by storming the Capitol once. Like,
oh yeah. And then thought they were going to go back to work.
Right. If you are a student of history, and specifically revolutionary history, which I'm not really a student of history broadly, but I'm certainly a student of revolutionary history. I wrote my college. It's like something that it's something I majored in. I know a lot about the history of international revolutions. And one thing that you know is that the first try is always like 7 to 8 years before they actually take over the government. So like, using Cuba as an example, who they just put back on the state-sponsored terrorism list, which is just to fuck with us because it has nothing to do with reality. But Fidel Castro's first major military intervention that he led, that, the attack on the Moncada barracks in Santiago, that was in 1953. Revolution didn't happen until 1959, which is 6 years later. You don't just get like to wander into the Capitol and then just like take over the government. So I thought it was cute that they were so proud of themselves anyway. And also, if it was that easy, the left could have successfully overthrown the government years ago. So obviously it's not that easy, because that's something the left's been working at for decades unsuccessfully. We never overthrown the government once. But also, another thought I had about this was that we should be careful to squash this movement before it grows, because 6 years later, we don't want them to take over the government.
Totally.
My second thought, though, this is 3 thoughts. I'd put it in 2. That's wrong. Getting back to the snowflakes, was I was like really shocked, not shocked. Shocked is not the right word. I was I was frustrated to see how many of them, when they had their screaming, crying fits in the airport, said, and this happened in multiple of those videos, said, "You're treating me like a Black person." Because I was like, listen, if you are somebody who is trying to deny the reality that Black people are treated more harshly by law enforcement in every context, everywhere, then like, you are denying reality, but maybe you still believe that you are, that you believe in equality. You just don't see the inequality where it is. That's a bad enough position to be in.
Yes.
If you are saying to me, though, that you fully recognize that Black people are treated differently by the police and more harshly by all law enforcement, and that because of that, when you are treated, after you have tried to overthrow the government, when you are treated badly in the airport by law enforcement because you have broken the fucking law, that your first thought is, well, wait a minute, they're treating me like a Black person, then like, what moral abyss do you live in? I mean, I shouldn't be, it's a white supremacist rally. Like, I don't know why I'm sitting here like, but,
No, but it's true. I mean, like, it sort of is further proof that that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the distinction between those two positions is not meaningful politically in the sense that both really dangerous policy, but they are certainly a meaningful distinction morally, just in the sense that, like, even though these are both bad things, being blind to injustice is still not as bad as being fully aware of injustice and like truly not caring.
Right.
I mean,
yeah,
I was just sort of like, I'm not shocked that that's how they feel in their hearts. I was a little shocked that they felt comfortable expressing that on the floor of an airport while they were having a crying fit. These people are the wimpiest people. That's why they have to walk around with guns all day, is because they can't handle their feelings.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, that I think has been the thing about all of these, arrests and various things. But like, they really are just the
babies.
whiniest, and it's like
we shouldn't be shocked. Trump is the whiniest person.
The whole Trump thing with and all of these people like being like make liberals cry and all of these. It's just sort of like you people can't deal with any of this.
They're so sensitive.
Yes.
They're so sensitive.
It was never us.
No, they're so weak. They're kind of pathetic. It's like a really it's truly like dealing with toddlers emotionally speaking, where I have had a lot of annoying travel experiences, as has anyone who travels a lot. I have never had a screaming crying fit on the floor in the middle of an airport because because I got bumped off a flight or something.
Yeah.
I've been bumped off flights. I've just handled it with the grace of someone who's mildly pissed off, but knows that they shouldn't
and heavily medicated.
That's right. You guys,
mildly pissed off,
I can
heavily
handle
medicated.
Any crisis right before a flight because I have taken
That's the Lila Nordstrom tagline at an airport.
Yeah, I'm also really good with kids at an airport. I wouldn't say I'm especially good. I don't think I'm not punching children in the face or anything, but I'm not your first thought when you're someone should handle these kids.
Right.
At an airport, frequently people will just leave their children with me thinking, well, she must be a teacher or something. She's so good with kids. And it's because I, for some reason, exude the quality of a responsible adult caregiver in an airport context. And I have no idea why that is. It's not like at any other time in my life, but Xanax will make me not fall into a puddle crying at the airport. And also I will be able to watch your kid while you're going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Two things. In any case, as we learn more about these riots, we also learn, first of all, the news is getting more horrifying every day. Totally. It's been a slow trickle of news that has not just made it seem like a bunch of disorganized assholes broke into the Capitol and just smeared shit on the walls, which is part of what happened. And I think part of the reason some of them are so shocked that they are being treated this way is because they really didn't necessarily have an intention of getting wrapped up in this kind of action. They were just sort of, I feel like a lot of them seemed like they were really angry and filled, with conspiracy theories and lies, and then got worked up and followed the crowd through into this stupid thing and didn't think about it until suddenly everyone was like, you're going to be arrested. And they were like, well, you can't arrest us for, and then it's like, well, you were trying to overthrow the government though. That's literally one of the things people arrest you for.
Yeah.
So
that was, I feel like the big takeaway from this week anyway, in regards to this, because just last week when we were recording the podcast, we were talking about we were debating whether this was an actual coup attempt or not.
Right.
And I was talking about Kyle Kulinski was calling it a diet coup, which I thought was sort of cute and clever, which remains that, I suppose. But every day that passed this week, we learned something new that pointed to, oh no, this wasn't a diet coup attempt.
No, it was the full coup attempt.
This was a full coup.
Well, I think part of what happened is that there were maybe 50% of the participants were doing a diet coup attempt because they didn't really know what they were doing.
They didn't know what was going right.
I think a lot of people followed some people who had very specific plans and had organized to assassinate members of Congress.
Totally.
There were people who had made clear plans and gone on reconnaissance missions and done all of this stuff.
And we're finding out that Democratic members of Congress, they went to their offices and some of them are unmarked and various things like that.
They knew their way around the Capitol.
They apparently got very close to Mike Pence. We're finding out just literally within the last couple of days, which they were, reminder, they were chanting that they wanted to hang him.
Right. And it seems based has picked up since that there were specific plans in place to not to hang him maybe, but to assassinate him, to assassinate Nancy Pelosi. Ayanna Pressley noted that the panic buttons had been removed from her office. The panic buttons aren't in every office, but they are in members who face specific threats. So the squad has panic buttons because obviously they get death threats every day.
Yep.
And so she noted that her staff realized in the midst of all of this that they had removed all the panic buttons from her office. So there were some things, there were some weird coincidences like that maybe aren't coincidences, but also multiple people have noted that they saw certain members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, giving tours the day before to some of the organizers of the events on the 6th. So that means that members of Congress actually led some of these people on like essentially reconnaissance / casing missions. Yep. And that is probably why they knew how to like find Clyburn's office in the Capitol. I've spent a lot of time in the Capitol, and I can tell you that I have never failed to get lost there at some point in my adventure there. Like it is a really confusing building. There are hallways everywhere. Some of them you're not allowed to go in. Some of them you are. They all look the same. You can't figure out what side of the building you're on ever. You know, like it's a really confusingly laid out complex. And I certainly wouldn't know even what direction to look for Clyburn's office. And it's an unmarked office somewhere randomly in the Capitol. And so beyond, you know, we had heard early on, we had heard reports that like people had, you know, asked people for directions to Chuck Schumer's office. And that made it seem like they were just a bunch of like silly, you know, people who didn't really know what they were doing. But there were other factions that were there that were, you know, that had done really specific research, that had maps of the tunnels, that had things like that. And some of them were given that information by sitting members of Congress who should not be sitting anymore after their participation in this has been brought to light.
Yeah. And a lot of these guys were ex-military or ex-police, current police.
A lot of current police, too many current police.
Right.
A lot of police forces have discovered.
We talked about the guy that, you know, was photographed with the zip ties. I think he's been arrested, but there's also been more recent pictures of people with like these specific types of cuffs that are easily put on people that get used often in hostage taking situations. So like, it was clear that like there were those aims that were happening here. So
concerning for the obvious reasons, but also concerning because this rally was planned by a lot of really well-known establishment Republican nonprofits who are really well financed. So like we know the Republican Attorney General's Association was up to like straight shenanigans here, but also like Turning Point, which is, listen, is that the PAC that I would choose as the most sane and responsible PAC in America? No, but these are, you know, regular players in Republican politics that financed this rally, that applied for the permits, that, you know, all of this was coordinated with real, I'm not going to call them respectable nonprofit groups, but I am going to call them known nonprofit groups.
Sure.
And because, you know, people were bussed in, that was paid for by Clarence Thomas's wife, among others. But these, you know, this was a rally that on the rally, you know, the rally itself was organized by people that A, were connected to some of these extremists and therefore probably knew that these actions were being planned, and B, continued ahead with providing a space for this riot to take place. And despite the fact that they are players in DC politics, they're not just like random extremists from Michigan. So that's a little concerning. And also, there were a bunch of former White House and congressional aides and staffers who were, you know, who were serving as coordinators and like on-site people for the rally. Like the whole thing was mayhem, you guys. And we thought. And so hopefully the reason we didn't have major armed insurrections today is because enough of those people have been arrested.
I mean, truly.
That they didn't have a chance to plan. I don't know.
And because it was planned for, too. I mean, the FBI sort of, I think it was shocking to hear this, but, you know, warned us earlier this week that, like, there were threats in all 50 states. So I think that everybody, you know, had their, you know, their guards up, and hopefully we're better prepared.
Prepared and planned.
Sure.
Better prepared.
Than they were on the 6th, even though they should have been more prepared on the 6th, which is an entirely separate conversation.
Well, yeah, that's, I mean, there's also been things coming out about how the FBI really didn't know what to expect on the 6th, even though I knew what to expect on the 6th. Like, it's like, you know what it reminded me of is the Iraq War, where I know that's not what you were thinking I was going to say, but we're just roll with me here for a while. when we heard about the weapons of mass destruction, most thinking people in America were like, that those aren't real. That's not a real thing. I'm currently working on a book that covers some of that era, and I am now realizing that the reason that we knew that is because there were some very coincidentally timed remarks about Iraq made early in the 9/11, the post 9/11 era, that made clear what the intentions of the Bush administration were before they thought of the WMD thing. And that is why we knew that those were not real. So at the time that the Bush administration was pushing that, most regular people were like able to tell that that was not a real threat. And yet somehow members of Congress who were getting special briefings on all of this were like unable to figure out that that was a real threat.
Right.
And that is sort of like the argument, the line of reasoning the FBI has been using, I feel like, or law enforcement in general has been using with this rally, where it's like, well, they like announced they were planning a riot, and then the date and time that they were going to have that riot, and like what the aims of the riot were. This was all taking place on social media apps that anyone can participate in. And like, because
Not
of
anymore,
that,
they can't.
even like even I knew about it, but somehow the FBI managed to remain ignorant, according to their response, discussion of this. They managed to remain ignorant of what obvious facts every other person in America knew, which I'm sort of curious. I mean, I have my suspicions about willful ignorance being contributing to that, but also I sometimes wonder if being inside of the bubble of like Beltway politics makes you blind to certain things. I think I feel like a lot of the time there are common sense political stances that seem to be like missing in the Beltway, because Beltway culture has like its own set of sort of truths they take for granted. And so I often think that like a lot of the times that you see these sort of breakdowns between like political knowledge and Beltway common sense political knowledge being, the times that they're different, I'm sort of like, what truth took hold in, inside the government conversation that made everyone think that this thing that any person with common sense can see is not true is true. It happens so much. It's so weird. But in any case, that wasn't a brilliant point I was trying to make. I just feel like
I get it.
Sometimes you think about the Iraq War and you're like, still, you guys, you still can't read common sense news? I don't know. In any case, in other news, the Biden inauguration is going to take place outside. They decided, even though Clyburn wanted to move it inside, and we apparently do whatever he wants now.
I mean, listen, literally, I was reading this article and it was on HuffPost, and like in one of the first paragraphs was what James Clyburn thought we should be doing about this. And I was like, look, I'm fucking done listening to James Clyburn. I'm sorry about it. You might like James Clyburn. I'm not here to disrespect James Clyburn, because James Clyburn has been in the House forever, and he is a hero for all of the reasons that we all know that he is a hero.
I might be here to disrespect him about his big pharma connections.
Right.
Just FYI. I'm here to 25% disrespect him.
We already had to let him pick the president. Right. And I feel like we've allowed him to do that against our better judgment. And now I feel like we as a people can decide that we don't give a shit whether James Clyburn wants the inauguration indoors or outdoors. I don't really
what he thinks about impeachment. I mean, there were so many times
literally anything
about things this week where I was like, oh, here's someone whose opinion doesn't actually matter on this topic.
Ugh, God, how are you hearing about James Clyburn?
I mean,
anyway,
we're going to be hearing a lot more about him, because every DNC pick that was made was basically like designed to appeal to James Clyburn personally. So we'll talk about that in a second. But first, Biden is not going to do his inauguration indoors. He's going to do it outdoors, I think, sort of for the symbolism of it. And I can understand why. Donald Trump will be able to say that he had a bigger inauguration crowd. And that is a thing. I think we should just let him take that and go back into his hole, because that is both where he belongs, and it'll make him happy enough that he won't bother us about it again. People are angry that Biden, who has been planning to take the Amtrak, his favorite thing on earth, to his inauguration since the dawn of time, is not going to be able to because of security concerns. I feel like it is fitting, I think, to me, that his inauguration would be a disappointing day for him, because I feel like it's a disappointing day for a lot of us. So I feel like he doesn't deserve to have the dream inauguration. He's not the dream candidate. It's like, is he better than Donald Trump? Like, of course, this is going to be better than having Donald Trump as the president. I'm not suggesting that I'm not happy to see this turnover happen.
Right, of
but I
course.
just feel like in the way that I feel mildly let down by the idea of Joe Biden being the president, I just think he deserves to be mildly let down about his inauguration experience.
He's getting the inauguration that he deserves.
He deserves. Yeah. So they've closed a lot of the downtown area or the area around the National Mall on Capitol Hill in DC.
Metro stations are closed.
As we said, there's like 1 million National Guardsmen. So it's going to be a small affair in a large space.
Right. But I mean, I think the main reason that they really wanted to do it is to just sort of like give it legitimacy, which I understand, because like that is obviously, that's what the insurrection was about to a degree, is that people don't believe that Joe Biden won this election because they've been fed all of these lies. And I'm not saying that like seeing Joe Biden inaugurated outdoors on television is going to change all of their minds, but it does sort of like, it's the beginning of the shift, right?
Yeah, and the imagery is important. I mean, for a moment like this where half the country believes literal, just straight lies about what's going on, some of the imagery is important, and that's an area where Democrats often compromise. So I don't think that he should be shy about not compromising.
So many of these people are being like, you know, and not even necessarily ones who tried to overthrow the government, but just general Trump people. You saw it, have seen it in the last couple months, sort of like whenever they're interviewed, it's like, oh no, Donald Trump he's gonna get sworn in on January 20th, and the interviewer will be like, well, how? And then people will be like, it's gonna happen, just you watch, he's gonna, and it's like, so this, you know, fixes that problem.
Also, the Trump escape is going to, I hope, be heavily documented because it's going to be so pathetic.
Right.
He is flying Air Force One to Florida in the morning before noon so that it is still Air Force One when he lands, so that he can spend the whole flight feeling special for being the president. Because as soon as you're not the president anymore, the plane you're on isn't Air Force One. The Air Force One is just the plane the president's on. No, like there's not like a physical Air Force One airplane. It's just if the president's on a plane, that's Air Force One. So he is basically flying Air Force One down to Florida, getting dropped off before noon so that it can still be Air Force One, and then just being left there so Floridians can deal with him. That is fitting an escape as he can make. Also, do you know that they finally released the number of days that he has played golf in his presidency? It is 300 and something days. It is literally a year of his presidency that he has played golf.
That sounds right.
1 full year of his presidency.
Remember when he wasn't going to play golf ever because he would be too busy?
I know. And now, have you looked at his schedule recently? It's just like President Trump will have many calls and that's his schedule every single day. He's working hard for the American people. He will have many calls and meetings.
Oh yeah, sure.
Probably. I mean, he's certainly having some meetings with like Giuliani and the MyPillow guy. So I guess he's up to something.
I know. Did you see that whole MyPillow guy thing the other day where he's like talking about martial law?
Yes.
Down on like some fucking notepad.
Well, he held up notes by accident, and then everyone started transcribing the notes, and it was like an argument for why we should have martial law or something. Which is like, who is the MyPillow guy? Why is he irrelevant?
The internet has had a lot of fun with this. My favorite thing is like people being really concerned about who Joe Biden's pillow guy is going to be.
I know. This is my aunt's joke that she told this morning, but she was like, when they finally arrest the MyPillow guy, we're finally going to have the MyPillow case.
Yeah, quality.
MyPillow guy has been good times in the sense that he's funny, not good times in the sense that anyone should impose martial law, but they've had to impose martial law to get rid of Donald Trump, which is really one of the more confounding things about what's going on right now. It's like Donald Trump did finally bring about the martial law he's been looking for. It's just that it was all that effort had to be made to get him to leave. And
doesn't get the irony either.
Now, some great Donald Trump news before we move on, though, is that New York City pulled all their contracts with him. So I can finally return to skating in Central Park. And that has been one of the most heartbreaking parts of the Trump era. And that started before he was president, because obviously I've been boycotting Trump industries for as long as I could. Sure. But he had been given a contract to run Wallman Rink and Lasker Rink, the 2 rinks in Central Park. If you're a new listener to the podcast, welcome. I don't know where we found you, but I'm an avid ice skater, and I grew up ice skating in Central Park, like so many people. And I have had to boycott all of the rinks in Central Park for years because Donald Trump put his name all over them and then also made them horrible. And just this week, New York City was like, we do have an out with these contracts because it does say that we don't have to stay in business with him if he breaks the law, which I think inciting an insurrection is is clearly against the law.
Yep.
So all of the things that the city had contracted for his company to manage in the city, which included a golf course and some other stuff as well, now reverts back to city management, which is great news because some of us have been dying to skate at Wallman Rink. It's a great outdoor activity that you can do during COVID. I mean, ice skating is all the things you want, and we haven't been able to because of Donald Trump, a person who was trying to ruin America. So that's some good news from New York City. If you're, thinking. Also, I have officially confirmed that every single building on what was once called Trump Place has removed their had removed all of their Trump sign, and they renamed the block.
Right.
It's like now like Riverside Street or Drive. It's like Riverside Drive South or something like that. They have removed his name from anything that it could be removed from in New York City.
So good.
And this was the final straw, was the Wallman Rink thing.
Yes.
Changing lives. It's changing lives.
Back to ice skating.
Anyway, the other thing that was announced this week was the new DNC leadership.
Terrible.
And
garbage.
It's
Trash.
a nightmare scenario. At first, Brent and I sort of disagreed about it, but then as the rest of the names came out, I think we started to return to our level of agreement about it.
Yeah, I mean, we won't rehash the entire thing because we talked about it a couple of weeks ago when his name got floated by, I think, James Clyburn, right? Wasn't that, or at least
well, of course that's
endorsed anyway?
He's in charge of everything.
Right, Jamie Harrison is going to be the DNC chair. And I sort of was of the mind, like, that there are probably worse people out there in the world to be the DNC chair. And I still think that. I can think of a million better people.
I am
also,
of the mind.
I was sort of like handling it, gracefully enough, I guess.
Right, and I was of the mind that someone from a state that is unwinnable to Democrats, who himself raised tons of money and then still lost, is not, even if he's a good fundraiser, that's not a person who can tell us how to win.
Right, exactly.
It's like, I think the new DNC chair needs to be someone who knows how to win, not someone who knows how to raise money.
Right.
I think it's great if you can raise money, but it's better if you can turn that money into a win.
Right. And so we got the rest of the names this week. Some of these people have won elections, so that's great, I suppose.
Right, but all of them have won them by being incredibly moderate. So
right, exactly, and that's
in
the
states
problem
that
here.
aren't necessarily representative of where the bulk of Democratic voters are.
Right. We've got Keisha Lance Bottoms, mayor of Atlanta.
Sure.
She's the vice
I would
chair.
say she's of this list I'm the least offended by her.
I agree. Yes. She's the vice chair of civic engagement and voter protection, which sure. Yes. Gretchen Whitmer, vice chair. No.
No.
Tammy Duckworth, who we
Absolutely
love
not.
for all the reasons that we love, but also not in DNC leadership for the reasons
Tammy
that we
Duckworth
don't love her.
Is somebody who I only love if the other person that she is with is a progressive.
Right, exactly.
She's like effective at a certain kind of political communication, but she's usually not communicating what I want to hear.
Yeah. This next guy, I don't know how to say his name.
Philemon Vela, I think.
Sure.
He is a Texas representative who's just like
he's in the
run-of-the-mill Texas moderate.
Yeah, Jason Ray, who is like a delegate from Wisconsin or something like that. I looked up all of these names because I was like, is one of these people a secret progressive?
Right.
And they're not actually.
No.
Virginia McGregor, Chris Corday, I don't know. Anyway, they're all, once you get down the list, they're not, they're obviously, they don't have any power anyway. But regardless, none of them are sort of like, secret, Bernie Sanders delegates in their past lives or anything like that. Like that.
Also, there's been this effort on the part of the DNC to head off criticism by reminding everyone that they have no power to do anything other than fundraise. And being like, no, it's the D-TRIP and the DSCC that have all the power. And like, the idea that the DNC doesn't have any leverage within those other organizations is the most insane bullshit I've ever heard in my entire life. The DNC is the major fundraising arm of the Democratic Party. The DNC is who puts on public events for the Democratic Party. The idea that they somehow are like unable, they have no political agency within the Democratic Party is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And also, we should be asking every single one of these organizations that control which candidates get supported by Democrats, where money goes, stuff like that, to make sure that they have representatives from every wing of the party. Because the thing I find offensive about the Biden administration or the Biden campaign, about the Biden experience in total, has been that except if it's something meaningless like a task force, which I said was bullshit from the beginning, and I was right. But unless it's a meaningless role like that, he never gives any representation to the 40% of his party that does not care for him.
Yeah.
And I feel like good politics is, sure, do some outreach to the center, but good politics is also ensuring your party's future by making sure the future of your party feels like a part of the process and invested. And the problem that they have right now is that the future of their party is not represented anywhere in his administration. And that includes with the people who are supposed to be the future of the party representatives, like Pete Buttigieg, who shares nothing, in terms of policy or in terms of positions with any young voter in America. So this is yet another example of a time they failed to reach out to the future of the party. And part of the DNC's job is not just to raise money, but to do the kind of messaging and to coordinate the kind of messaging that gets Democrats elected. And you can't do that if you don't know where your voters are.
Yep. Agreed.
In any case, screw them. And also,
Terrible.
It's one thing to put Jamie Harrison as the chair and then have people representative of the party as a whole on the way down.
Right.
I also think that when you think about who belongs as a chair for the party, it is, I think in this era where they're going to have to start using digital, they're going to have to switch to some cheaper campaign methods because that's what's working.
Yep.
I'm sure she didn't want to do the job, but it's like a Stacey Abrams if you're going with a moderate.
Totally.
She's someone who knows how to expand the electorate. She's someone who knows how to do real meaningful voter outreach. And she's someone that knows how to do that without pissing off people who aren't in her wing of the party. We're not in the same wing of the party as Stacey Abrams. I don't know if everyone realizes that in America because everyone just loves her so much, as they should. But certainly Brent and I are not in the same wing of the party as Stacey Abrams. We are far to her left.
Yeah.
But I respect that she is somebody who does work that I also think is important work. We all agree that the work she does is beneficial to the party as a whole and therefore us as well. That is not how I feel about the Jamie Harrison experience.
No, and with all due respect, I mean, I do think that you are absolutely right that, they're worried about fundraising here. Look, I liked Jamie Harrison in the sense that there were even some stunts that he pulled in this.
I donated to him.
Right. I was going to say I did too. When it looked like, especially when it looked like maybe that was tightening or whatever. But, a large percentage of the money that he got was, you are someone who is not Lindsey Graham money.
Yeah.
And so I worry about if they've hired him for the sole reason that they think that he's going to be able to further set fundraising records. I worry that is the case because the reason that he got all of that money was because people were thinking that maybe there was a chance that Lindsey Graham might go down.
It's should Amy McGrath be the head of the DNC? No. She is a person who is just not Mitch McConnell. And I think also, like Jamie Harrison, she is a person who doesn't know how to deliver a state. I want to see someone who has a track record delivering votes. That is not what we ended up seeing with Jamie Harrison. It was great that polling showed him so close, but the results were not that close.
Polling showed a lot of Senate races closer than they ended up being.
South Carolina is not a state that is going to vote Democratic. He doesn't have meaningful insight into what the Democratic electorate, is looking for and could be delivered with, because it's reasonable to expect there is a Democratic electorate to deliver for in South Carolina. I mean, I would someone from North Carolina would be a smarter choice because that's a state we actually could
at least
deliver.
Swinging. Right.
That's a swinging state. It's a swing state, but also it's been gerrymandered, so it hasn't been a swing state recently. But it is a state that has promise. Georgia, a state that has promise. These are all states that it is relevant to think that someone who has made a meaningful impact in the electorate actually understands how to win in those states.
Yep.
What is it? Who cares if more people vote Democratic in South Carolina?
I know.
I don't they got to pick the president for reasons no one can identify because they don't vote Democratic in the general.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, and obviously, it is important that we run serious candidates in every state, including South Carolina. I'm certainly not suggesting that's not true, but I am suggesting that maybe the strategy Democrats pursue in South Carolina has literally nothing to do with anywhere else.
With how they're going to win elections nationwide.
Elsewhere,
right? Totally.
Including in bordering states where they are winning elections.
Totally.
I mean, anyway,
I agree. Yeah.
It makes me furious because the DNC goes out of its way to make me furious every year. So that's life. And it's only taken us 40 minutes to get to what was the real news story of the week, which is that they impeached Trump for the second time. So he's now the most impeached
He's the
president ever.
most, right. He's the most impeached. He's the most losery because
He's the most losery.
he's the only one who's lost the um, uh, popular vote twice.
That's right.
And he's now the only one to be impeached twice. So like he is the biggest loser of all the presidents that we have had.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's
which we knew, but now it's just backed up by numbers and facts.
Yeah. And he managed to have the most bipartisan impeachment ever. Now, is the bar pretty low for that? Sure.
Super low.
Incredibly low. It only took 10 Republicans to make it the most bipartisan impeachment of all time.
Right.
Listen, that's something else to hang your hat on. He inspired enough hate that he caused 10 Republicans in what some might argue is the most politically fractured era in American history.
I agree. And, you know, I think that, you know, we've last week on the podcast, we were talking a lot about like how we shouldn't let a lot of these Republican senators who sort of like then all the, you know, like Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and all these people who are trying to like rewrite history. And while I don't want to like give honor to Liz Cheney in any way, like because like she remains as awful as she pretty much always has been, I do think that there has to be like some like this. In terms of
a big move.
Anyway, this was a big move specifically for her being in leadership. Like brave isn't the right word because like, but I like they.
It was brave in the context.
At least did do the right thing, and they're in the House. They're gonna have to have a re-election in 2 years. One of them was a fucking freshman. Liz Cheney is the number 3 in leadership, so like that was huge, especially considering, you know, people like Kevin McCarthy and all the other deplorables in leadership were like fighting back against this as vehemently as possible. I do think that these 10 people should be given a little bit of credit, more so than some of these other bozos who are just sort of like trying to pretend like the last 4 years didn't happen.
I agree. I think this was, I mean, you know, I think I wouldn't call it brave in the context of larger society, but
that's
in the
not the right word.
We're in, where they were really looking at having, you know, not only facing personal danger, which, you know, a lot of them suggested that other members of their caucus would have voted for impeachment, except that they were afraid about the personal danger they faced. Now, listen, AOC gets death threats every 2 seconds. So like, be a little brave. If that's, you signed yourself up for a job where you have to be brave sometimes, like, sorry about it. But I do think that some of them are trying to do the work to at least, you know, bring back what could be at least a medium intellectual Republican Party. You know, I think a lot of them got on TV and said articulate things about why the president had committed crimes. And I will say, I wanted to specifically note Jamie Herrera Butler from Washington, because she did something that I think it would be smart for more members of Congress to do. And I don't understand why it's something that only ever happens on the left. It's something that, you know, she did something that AOC basically was the first member of Congress to really do, which is she started a tweet, you know, she started tweeting about her vote. And instead of saying, you know, instead of complaining she was getting death threats or complaining that her, you know, that people are being so unreasonable or saying that she's too scared to do anything, whatever, she said, I have been getting a lot of calls from constituents who are very concerned about why I voted yes. And I just wanted to explain why. She explained it in a very non-judgmental way. She explained it in a really straightforward way that was in plain English. It was a way that was not, she didn't explain it in a partisan way. She just laid out her position. And she didn't judge the people who were panicking at her because she knew what had been going on. She knew that they, you know, had been told incorrect things. She, you know, she got what were obviously a shit ton of really scary phone calls. And instead of being like, everyone's crazy and, you know, I'm not going to do anything, or I'm just going to be a lunatic also, she was just like, non-judgmentally, let me explain why I made this vote. And I wish that was something that more members of Congress on both sides felt like they could do. I understand why so many don't, because they don't have good reasons for making votes. Making principled votes is not something a lot of them do a lot of the time.
Exactly.
And it's easy to do when you're AOC because her whole shtick is taking principled votes. So she's able to do that all of the time. But I thought that was a sort of smart choice on her part, because it allowed her to communicate with her constituents who are obviously very concerned about this without judging them, without, you know, disengaging from the conversation. And that was kind of what some of these other people did on TV. Like Adam Kinzinger, I saw him all over TV in the days leading up to the impeachment vote. And he was he was a freshman. He's not a freshman anymore, but he was a freshman last year. He just sort of very carefully laid out why he felt that the president was actually guilty of these crimes, which the charge was incitement of insurrection, and did it without sort of being judgmental towards either his colleagues or his voters. And I think that's probably in his context, as in the Republican context, was probably very important, even though you might feel the need to tell them that they're all being idiots. But like a lot of them did good communications work. And that is in contrast to the other Republicans who did some of the looniest communications work I've ever heard in my life. So I will say that the nice thing about these 10 Republicans was that they really did try to do the communications work to validate this among their own voters. And that I thought was an effort that maybe people should try to engage in more. Like,
sure. Right.
I mean, it's hard as a Republican because you're rarely taking votes on good ideas, but
right. And also like the people that you're dealing with are not like dealing in facts either. So like reasoning with them in a way where you're like, actually reasoning with them is not necessarily always going to work out in your favor.
But that's what I think. Something like what Jamie Herrera Butler did was smart because it allowed her to say, this is my position.
Right.
You don't have to have the same position as me, but this is my position, which is this is the best way to engage with someone who disagrees with you politically, is not to tell them that they are wrong and that they are stupid and that you are right. It is to say, here are our shared areas of concerns, and my position on these areas is X, Y, and Z. When I run into people who don't believe in single payer healthcare, I don't tell them that they're wrong to not, unless they're Democrats, and then I do. But if they're Republicans, I don't tell them they're wrong to not believe in single payer healthcare. I tell them, well, my experience with private healthcare has been X, Y, and Z, and my experience with government-run healthcare has been X, Y, and Z. And so to me, it seems like X, Y, and Z is a better way to run this. And that doesn't challenge them. Then they can just think about it. And that's kind of what the communication strategy was for these 10 Republicans. But it was in contrast to like one of the craziest communications efforts I've ever witnessed in my life from all of their colleagues. So they really were standing up in the face of crazy in the context that they were in. Now, I don't know if it should be considered brave to stand up for what are basic facts, but we're in a crazy time. In any case, the 10 Republicans were Liz Cheney, John Katko, who's a Republican from upstate New York. He's an upstate New York Republican, so he has to be kind of careful. David Valadao from California, same deal. Fred Upton from Michigan, Adam Kinzinger from Illinois, Tom Rice from South Carolina. Surprise, because he was not one that everyone was reporting on beforehand.
Everybody was reporting as the vote was being taken that there were going to be 9 Republicans, and then there ended up being 10. And the reason that there were 10 was because nobody had Tom Rice on their bingo card.
There was Dan Newhouse and Jamie Herrera Butler from Washington, Anthony Gonzalez from Ohio, and then Peter Meyer, who's from Michigan and is a freshman. So this is one of his first votes, and that's kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, and this was also fun too, because like it was some of the first time
that we
heard from some of the freshmen. Ooh, boy, English. I mean, it was like, because it's one of the first votes they made, which first off is like wild that like that might be one of the first things that you would do in your new Congress. But like it was the first time that we'd heard from like Richie Torres and Cori Bush and so it was like what a way to start your job, right?
Really starting off with a bang.
So now we have to figure out when now we get into the point where Democrats could actually fuck this up, right? Like the Nancy Pelosi put on her impeachment dress and she got everybody on board and they did the thing. And now it's like, okay, what do we do? Right?
Well, and she basically had to be dragged there kicking and screaming because they were all like, someone will invoke the 25th, right? And the people who could invoke the 25th were like, someone will impeach him, right? And so at the point, she was just like, I guess we have to do this, even though that's not what we want to do.
Right.
And now they have to figure out how to do a trial in the Senate in the first days of the Biden presidency while they're also trying to pass things for the Biden presidency.
I know, which is crazy. And interestingly, though, I now am of the mind that there is actually no bad time to do this. Because one thing that I was, and I'll tell you why, because, we talked a little bit last week. I think there was some debate as to whether they would wait for the first 100 days to like get all of the
that's what
COVID passed,
Byron wanted to do.
All of those things, and make sure that he had, exactly. And to make sure that he had all of his, cabinet picks, through the confirmation hearings and all of those things. And at first, I was like, well, that's a shitty idea, because it's like, we're all thinking about this now. Like, there's a political appetite for this now. No one is going to like face any blowback for doing this now. And I still actually, if I had to pick, I would still say to do it now.
Yeah.
Like that would be my choice. But after the way just this last week went, where every single day we were finding out something new and terrible about like how that whole insurrection went down, I think that it almost, I don't think it will be bad if they do choose to wait 100 days, because I think what we're going to have had more arrests, we're going to have more evidence of how insane it was. We're going to have statements from some of these people who have been arrested. We're going to have dug deeper into how this thing was planned. We're going to have looked into what was happening on social media deeper than we have now. Like, if anything, we're just going to have more evidence to have an actual trial. I think I think it still makes more sense to do now. But like, I don't think it, like, if the Republicans are thinking that they're going to be better off in 100 days from now, I don't actually think that that's accurate.
Also, incitement of the charge is so easily provable. It's really just a matter of political will.
All you have to do is watch the speech that he gave that morning, or any of the public statements that he gave in the 2 months after the election. And I mean, or any time that he spoke over the last 4 years, really, if we're being honest with ourselves.
The thing that I was most concerned about with the idea of them waiting was that Donald Trump would spend the whole time sucking up the news cycle while the 100 days was happening, which I still do worry about, because
I do too.
Biden really needs to like hit the ground running. He needs to get vaccines into every single person's arms. He needs to make sure that people have the assistance, financial assistance that they need to keep eating. He needs to make sure that some of the worst policies of the Trump administration are rolled back. I mean, he has a lot that he has to get through.
Right.
And I don't want us to get hung up talking about Donald Trump for those first 100 days, because I think it will step on the victories he does have. And I think there are some ways he could have some easy victories that even people like me who are constantly naysaying him would be excited about. If he can figure out how to get a vaccine into my arm in the next couple months, then I will be excited that he is the president right now. Like, if he can figure out how to make it so that, there is a national mask mandate or something, like, there are ways in which my personal safety could be benefited from him getting out there really quickly and getting stuff done. And I don't want him to get stepped on doing that, because if the Democrats are who deliver that, I want people to remember that. And that's an area where I think even moderate Democrats could deliver. But of course, Donald Trump doesn't seem to know how to contact the press anymore. So on some level, maybe it doesn't matter, because
I know, now that he's banned for Twitter for life.
It's been so peaceful without him on Twitter. Twitter is still filled with all the same bad takes on everything as it always is, but it's so much calmer.
Yeah. But didn't you see, actually, there was an article, I should have thrown it on here, but apparently all of the disinformation was way down since they removed him, because obviously it starts with him, I mean, like,
with him.
There's other terrible people on Twitter, like you said, but I mean, like, just
they don't have 84 million followers or whatever he has, though. I mean, the way that he's able to amplify bad information is part of why, he was violating Twitter's terms of service, back like 4 years ago.
I know.
Also, I feel like I've heard a lot of Republicans this week say that we should nationalize the big social media companies because they're stepping on free speech, which has been my favorite take of this entire cycle. Because like how when they invented vaccines a few months ago by saying that instead of doing vaccines, maybe we should take a piece of the virus that's, too weak to run and inject that into our arms, which is what vaccines are. They also seem to have invented socialism recently, where they're like, maybe our First Amendment rights would be better protected if we nationalize the tech companies, which is like, yeah, you want to socialize the tech companies? I'm in. I saw some TikTok where a guy was taking a Don Jr. speech, and just every few minutes he'd be like, I feel like we're really vibing right now. Like, going on about how we should nationalize big tech. And I had an epiphany, actually, which was maybe what we've been doing wrong as socialists is using socialist language to describe things when we should have been using fascist language to describe things. Because what if we called it nationalizing healthcare instead of socializing healthcare? That sounds much more patriotic than socializing healthcare. And it can meaningfully mean the same thing depending on who's saying it. But what if I just
went around... Be proud of your national healthcare. America.
Yeah, America first.
Yeah.
Did it. Like, what if we just walked around nationalizing things instead of... That's, by the way, the thin line between authoritarianism and communism that we have seen in the past has existed with that. I mean, when they talk about what, Fidel Castro did to the Bacardi company, in the 50s and 60s. They did not call that, he might have called it socializing it, but we called it nationalizing it. And meaningfully, it was the same thing, which was that the profits and the company were owned by the people.
Yeah.
So let's start talking about let's nationalize big tech. Forget it, socializing it, nationalize it. Nationalize the healthcare system.
Yeah, totally.
Nationalize education. And then that can be an example of why we should pay for it, because it's nationalized, as opposed to, let's meet them on the verbal playing field that they're on, and just take all the meetings away from them. Someone else posted a thing that was just Tucker Carlson giving like a long speech about how, they're the big up there, they are just using race to divide us, but it's really about class. And I was like, is he giving a speech about class consciousness right now on Fox? And it was just like a bunch of tweets of people making jokes that were like, there was one that was really confusing, that was just like a guy drinking a huge carton of water in class. And this girl was like, why does he need this much water? I can't deal with white people, or something like that. I mean, it was just like a joke that she had made. That was like one of the examples of how race is dividing us. We need to be focused on class. And I was like, yeah, class unity. Tucker Carlson, what are you talking about? So
amazing.
The right has been having a bit of an identity crisis. I think if we could grasp some of it and pull them around, maybe we could diffuse some of this by letting them know that we are also in favor of nationalizing a lot of these things.
Well, I think so too. And it's interesting that you say that, because, we're about to talk about like who some of the Republicans are that might vote for impeachment here. And I think that you bring up an interesting point, because the Republicans, and it's been talked a lot about in the last week here, are sort of in a huge dilemma, right? Like they have Trump, all of their supporters, something like 70% still support Trump, but they themselves are wanting to sort of like move on from Trump. And also, I think they've found themselves in this tricky position where, like, how do they rid themselves of him, but also, continue to be able to win elections themselves? And I think they are, and also now you're starting to see some of the money dry up, right? At least corporate money. Some of these big corporations that used to give to the RNC are saying that they're not going to, and some of them have said that they are not going to permanently.
I know some of them have hilariously said they're not going to for 6 months, which is like, well, I don't who's money for the first 6 months.
Exactly. We saw the NRA go into bankruptcy this week,
that was
by the way. And so I think actually that a lot of them, for various different reasons, I think are going to be freed up to vote to impeach, because I think that while they still may be scared about what the Trump mob is going to do, I think that fear exists right now anyway. I think that,
and nothing scares them more than losing the money.
Well, right, nothing scares them more than losing the money. And I also think that, like, electorally, I think some of the smart ones in the party know that they are probably up shit creek right now. If they can figure out how to win elections nationwide after this has happened in the next 2 years, then they will have deserved to win all of those elections.
Yeah.
Because
it's going to take.
Because really, I just don't know how they are more fractured at this point within at least the leadership of the party than the Democrats, I think, have ever probably been. And we've been fairly fractured. I don't know how you run non-Trump people right now and have, or Trump people for that matter. I just don't know. I don't know just how Republicans. I don't know how you get Republicans to just vote for Republicans right now. I like, there are two very, very, very clear factions right now, and I don't know how you get that squared away in the next 2 years. But anyway,
I think the risk to certain members, the risk depending on where they fall politically right now, there are different risks to different members of the Senate. So, for example, like the sort of, as Brent has called them, the moral folks, he says that with air quotes, obviously, because they are still Republicans, but like the Collins, Murkowski, Romney, and even Ben Sasses of the world are going to need to rely on moderate Republican votes to win again. They're not going to be able to keel all the way to the right, because that's not where they live politically. So they need to cut this off right now. They have a real self-interest in ending this sort of tyranny of the far, far right.
Right.
And I think there are some people who are on the far, far right who probably have no hope of winning in a Collins world.
I
So,
agree.
like
Yes.
Josh Hawley doesn't get to just be like, and now I'm just like a reasonable guy.
Right. No, he's
And
winning
so
because he's not a
he has
reasonable
to
guy.
double
He's a
down because
crazy
he has
person.
nothing else.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
Ted
I went.
has to
Yeah.
double down.
Yeah, we sort of like went through like all of the senators right now who will be voting on this, and we know that they need 17. First off, Mitch McConnell has already called this like a vote of conscience on his part. So like if he declares at some point that like he is going to vote yes on this, then I think that opens the floodgates, and then I think it probably then they do convict. They need 17 people. So assuming McConnell
Although I believe they only need 2/3 of the members who are there.
Right.
So, and only 51 have to be there. So
Yeah.
some of them could just be busy.
Right. They could miss a flight.
There could be a logistical concern.
Yes.
Their
Scheduling
child could have
errors.
food poisoning, scheduling error. I mean, a lot can
Right.
happen in the world out there. Life is complicated.
Exactly. But let's say McConnell decides that he's not going to vote to convict. Then you look at all of the other people, and we went through literally all of them and sort of like put them into a few buckets. The air quote moral
McConnell
folks.
is evil, though, also, but I don't know what logic he could be following to not convict at this point.
I actually think he's going to vote yes. The other thing to keep in mind as we talk about...
He's suffering from mystery hand disease, first of all. So the hand disease might take him before he has to face re-election anyway.
Right,
for sure. His horrifying hands.
And also, I think the reason that he wanted to pass this off was because he just didn't want to deal with it. And look, I get that.
He doesn't want to be in charge of it,
right?
Yeah.
But also, I think that the reason that he wants to just like give this to the Democrats is because that at that point, Donald Trump is already gone. So they're not voting to remove him from office.
Yeah.
Right? They're just voting to convict to make sure that he can't run again, and none of them want him to run again.
Exactly. There's not even the people who supported him don't want him to run again because they want to run again. That's
right. They want to run themselves. Right. Tom Cotton doesn't want to have to support Donald Trump again because Tom Cotton wants to be the president.
Exactly.
So anyway. There were the four air quote
morals.
Right. And we got to get to 17. So then there's another bucket of people that I put people into who are going to have tough re-elections, some tougher than others potentially. But we've got Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, where Trump just lost in a landslide.
Pennsylvania is always a risk.
Richard Burr, who is from North Carolina, and also I put him in this category, but I could have also put him in the category of people who are in their 100s who might be retiring in the next 6 years because he falls in both of those categories.
Right.
Rob Portman from Ohio, who is also not a million years old, but is 69 and might just be like, look, I'm fucking over this.
Yeah.
Ron Johnson, who is definitely not going to vote yes on this, but Ron Johnson is selfish above all else and can read what just happened to Donald Trump himself in the state of Wisconsin in this last year. So like if he felt like that was the only way to save his job, then he would do it.
He doesn't have any moral principle that would prevent him from making a crazy vote.
Right, he has no scruples.
Yeah.
Marco Rubio up in Florida and Moran in Kansas, which is doing who knows what these days, really, right? Also, I think getting up there, Moran. So that gets us up to 10, right?
Right.
Then there's the people who might just be toying with retirement at some point, not necessarily before 2022, but before they would be up again. Like if they know that they're going to retire in 2026, it's just, you're not having to worry about a re-election. So
I would also suggest that every single one of these people seriously think to themselves, I should retire right now.
I would think so too.
Every single one of them is too old right now to be serving.
So we've got Grassley in Iowa. He's 87. We've got Richard Shelby. He's 86.
By the way, was shocked by how many of them are 86 because I've been so focused on Feinstein and Grassley because they're so old that I had forgotten how many of them are 86.
Yep.
Which is only 1 year younger than Dianne Feinstein, the oldest person in the Senate.
I know, exactly. Who just filed papers to run again, by the way. Call her and tell her to go hurry up and die at this point. I'm not... I know it sounds like a terrible thing to say, but like if that's the only thing that is going to keep her from running again in 2026, then so be it. That's where I'm at with her at this
Stop her in any way you can.
Yeah. Kennedy, who's only 69, but he's up again in 2022 in Louisiana, which can get dicey. Louisiana, we're not so far away from having elected Democrats statewide in Louisiana. Boozman from Arkansas, who's 70, who is also up in 2022, who would probably win, but like maybe he's 70 and
like time with his grandchildren.
Right, exactly. Roy Blunt, who again is up in 2022 in Missouri, which again we're not so far away from having elected Democrats statewide. He's 71, and Jim Inhofe, who's another one of our 86-year-olds.
Yeah. I can't believe Inhofe is 86. He is
Right.
old.
And he's not running again until 2026, so there's no way he's going to run again in 2026. I would assume anyway.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that gets you to 16. So again,
Right.
I do think it sort of, to a degree, hinges upon how leadership decides that they're going to vote and how vocal they are and how early they announce that they're going to do it. It's going to be hard to get. It's going to be hard to get there because I'm not saying all 16 of those are, you know, in the
But
bag.
there's, I think, some people that might be sneak attacks. For
example,
there's
others. That is not an expansive list.
That's not. I mean, but
like
think about who we saw, like James Langford, who had to change his vote. You know, in the middle after he was trying to hold everything up, had to kind of change his vote at the last minute.
Yep.
If there's one thing Rand Paul hates, it's doing a normal, predictable thing.
Right, and he's up in 2022.
He's up in 2022
because how swingy is Kentucky actually?
No, but
I do hope that Charles Booker runs against him now.
Rand Paul is also somebody who I don't think likes. He's an asshole. He likes to be an independent kind of asshole. I don't think he likes this brand of assholery. I think the same could probably oddly be said of Mike Lee. He sometimes does really confusing things where you're like, he's very conservative and also just like weird. Like Mike Lee is the person I've had the most concerning conversations with in all of the Senate. I've never been more uncomfortable in a meeting than I was the time that I had to meet with Mike Lee. But he is somebody who does unpredictable things a lot of the time in the way that Josh Hawley sort of was, but in a way that is a little bit more grounded in, I mean, reality in the most expansive way. Obviously, Mike Lee is up to shenanigans almost 100% of the time, but not in the way that he's not in the camp of inciting insurrection, I don't think, to the degree that like a Hawley is. So I think there are a few other maybe like dark horse candidates who could also be added to this list for sure that that are not part of any specific wing.
Immediately jumped out at me. But I absolutely agree with you that there's other people who are not necessarily moderates, but who are just sort of like reasonable in a way that like might be reasonable enough to get rid of Donald Trump. I'm not saying that they're like reasonable people because they're not, clearly.
Or would personally benefit from Trump disappearing. I mean, I don't even think that Tom Cotton is above voting for this because Tom Cotton wants to run for president.
I don't either.
And you'll notice Tom Cotton was pretty absent from all of those discussions about the election being stolen, which I found really interesting because Tom Cotton has no scruples and is pro-fascism, as he noted in the New York Times.
I know.
But he was nowhere to be found in that conversation.
And also, as much of an apologist as Ted Cruz has been, Ted Cruz, wants to be president, so he's probably would lose to Donald Trump again in a primary. B, had his wife called ugly by Donald Trump. You know, supposedly his father has like some, you know, relation to the Zodiac killer or something. I mean, like, there's a million reasons why Ted Cruz also might just be like, hey, fuck you, guy. You ruined my life.
Ted Cruz is a person who does not care about the consistency of his position. Like, what's he afraid to vote against? He doesn't want Donald Trump to run again. In fact, Ted Cruz, we know from his experience running against Donald Trump on a personal level, wants nothing to do with the man and thinks he's
that's what I'm saying, right?
Asshole. So even though he's sort of Lindsey Graham'd his way around, and also, I mean, Lindsey Graham might just be angry because he lost his friendship. And
all of these people are going to do what serves them best.
Exactly. Where is Lindsey Graham going to land? Who's going to be his friend now?
I don't know.
Who is the person that is like, can we find him a less troublesome friend? Because he's just sort of like, he's like a parasite. Like he just sort of becomes whatever he is sort of floating in the vicinity of.
Yeah, totally.
So like when John McCain was the power he was attracted to, he was kind of moderate and reasonable. And then when Donald Trump was the power he was attracted to, he became like a crazy person. Can we find him, knowing that he doesn't have the capability to make these decisions himself? Can we just find him a more responsible friend?
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, is there somebody out there who has a kind of charisma that Lindsey Graham would feel like attracted to that we can just get in front of him?
Right.
And then he can follow him around like a puppy dog like he does with all of his friends?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Guys, get to thinking on this. I feel like at some point we should do like profiles of every member of the Senate Republican caucus just to see if there's anyone that we can direct him towards.
Yeah. I agree.
I mean, that's, I think, our only hope. In any case, the other thing that's up in the air about the impeachment trial is that nobody really knows who's going to rep Trump. People seem to think it will be Giuliani, but Trump also has been telling people he wants to stop paying Giuliani's legal fees. So even though Giuliani's been going to meetings with him, recently at the White House. No one's really sure what his relationship right now is with
God,
Giuliani.
please let it be Rudy Giuliani, though. Let's have an impeachment trial with Rudy Giuliani as the lead attorney for Donald Trump. I mean, that is what America, we had to live through 4 years of this presidency. We deserve this.
I hope that he understands that what America is looking for from him as a person who has done things that are actually indefensible is an entertaining defense, not a credible defense. Like, get good ratings. Do what you're good at. Don't try to convince us you didn't try to cause an insurrection. You did. Everyone knows it. Everyone was there. Like, just give us the entertaining trial that we all deserve.
That's right.
You know, give us the Four Seasons total landscaping version of an impeachment trial. I mean, that's all anyone wants.
That's it.
So there's one person that is sort of, maybe people are talking about, might be asked to join the team, because Alan Dershowitz is someone they're always talking about. He has no scruples, so he'll do whatever. But John Eastman, who is the attorney that told Pence that he could block the certification of Biden's win, which is a non-true thing, is somebody they're also thinking might join. So
have him join too. Have him and Rudy Giuliani do it.
Sidney Powell could join. I mean, there's a lot of great choices out there.
Totally. My Pillow guy could be an advisor.
The My Pillow guy. Like, if you're not looking for your case to succeed because it's sort of indefensible.
Right.
Like, I mean, pick anyone.
Yeah.
Pick someone who has only played a lawyer on TV. I don't see why that would harm or hurt you.
I agree.
I mean, help or harm you.
By the way, before we move on from Rudy Giuliani, it came to my attention earlier this week, and then by way of me, it came to Lila's attention earlier this week, that maybe you are a person listening to this podcast who has not seen Donald Trump motorboating Rudy Giuliani while Rudy Giuliani is in drag. And I thought that, like, everyone just...
Through 4 years of the Trump presidency. Like,
I thought that people were born with that knowledge. I thought that was a thing that, like, people had, like, somehow just, that was part of our brain stems, basically, was like the knowledge that you had seen that at some point in your life, even if maybe you hadn't.
If you hadn't.
But it's like making the round on TikTok right now. My boyfriend sent it to me, and I responded to him, and I was like, is this the first time that you've seen this, with like 10 exclamation points and question marks? So listen, if you don't know what we're talking about right now,
get your life right.
I urge you to find a computer or a phone. You're probably already on your phone listening to this podcast.
Right.
Get yourself in order.
Well, and
also,
we've made
read
it
our
incredibly...
blog that we did about all the insane Rudy Giuliani things.
We've made it very easy for you, because our most recent blog post, and look, we don't post a lot, so it's from a while ago, but our most recent blog post is just 12 times that Giuliani did insane things before he became the advisor to the president.
Yeah, like 3 of those things were him in drag, by the way.
Giuliani famously loved drag. If you need to know anything about the history of Donald Trump or Rudy Giuliani, just ask a native New Yorker, because this was all news that was freely available in New York City for decades. But we have listed all of the 12 things that you should know that Giuliani did in his time as mayor of New York City and before he got involved with the Trumps. We have also given you links to the videos. Mm-hmm. There is more than one video that you'll want to see. He is somebody who has famously loved doing drag, so he has a lot of drag videos and pictures.
He did drag on SNL. He did drag with the Rockettes.
Yeah, he danced with the Rockettes in tights, you guys. I mean, that, like, and if you haven't yet seen that, I don't know what have you seen? You know, I'll forgive you for not knowing about, you know, the time that he married his cousin, but like I don't know how you missed critical moments in American history, like the time that, you know, that Donald Trump motorboated him in drag. Those are critical moments in our history. In any case, if you go to braintrustlive.com, it's the first blog post on the page. Just get in there.
Yep, that's right.
And get yourself back to rightness. In any case, so some Trump officials we heard a few that bravely quit just 2 weeks before the end of their job. And then we heard from a few more that they couldn't quit because they needed the health insurance. And I have to believe that some of these people that we're about to talk about were in that category, but also wanted to quit and didn't know what to do. Because on Friday, Kayleigh McEnany and her deputy, Brian Morgenstern, left. so there's no press shop at the White House anymore, which is funny because he also doesn't have Twitter. So they truly have no way of getting any information out to the public aside from the press
makeup
room.
artist had previously left.
Yes. And that I think was largely behind her choice. But then Alex Azar, our HHS secretary, resigned in the most hilarious manner earlier this week by saying that because he was just furious about the riots, he was gonna leave effective January 20th.
And then also talked about like all the great and wonderful things that or Operation Warp Speed has done, which
has been an abject failure on every level. That is like being like, I am going to walk right out of this movie the moment it ends. Like
right when the credits roll,
as soon as the credits roll, I am leaving. I will not stand for this movie, so I will wait until the credits roll and then I'll leave. Like, I mean, don't even just leave on the 20th.
Yeah, just be done, right?
You weren't if you're not principled enough to leave before the 20th, then no one needs an announcement from you. Like tweet later that you're disappointed about the riots. Like I know. Have an opinion about it, sure. You don't pretend like you're justifying leaving on the basis of a thing that you're gonna have to leave anyway. But it's like, in any case, speaking of Operation Warp Speed, though, his pride and joy and the reason
Operation Sloth Speed. I mean,
staying till the 20th. Operation Warp Speed, like so many things related to space in the Trump administration, has accomplished next to nothing. Operation Warp Speed helped us fund a vaccine, and that's great. And so did Dolly Parton and a lot of other people. But the other thing Operation Warp Speed was supposed to do was get the vaccines into people's arms so that we wouldn't just have the technology to have a vaccine, but would actually stop people from dying of coronavirus. And that seems to be where they got a little hampered.
Yeah.
The death toll in February is going to reach 500,000 people.
Yeah.
Remember when we were only going to have maybe 100,000 people, and then we were only going to have 300,000 people, and now it's going to be February and we're going to have 500,000 people? The reserve stockpile of the vaccines that they claimed they were going to release last week turned out didn't exist, weren't a thing. They just said words basically, and then everyone was like, yes, and it meant nothing.
Not real.
There are something like 10 or 11 million people have gotten their first injections. Only like 1.5 million have gotten their second injections. But they're having rocky rollouts like everywhere, in part because there's no national coordination. And I think one thing that we learned this week was that a lot of the drug companies that are producing these vaccines actually do have extra, like enough of them to continue to grow this rollout. But there had been no accommodations made to acquire said vaccines and distribute them to anyone. So instead, Pfizer just has millions of vaccines that no one is taking because they're just sitting in Pfizer's offices waiting for someone to care. LA this week announced that they were going to let people 65 and older make appointments, and then recalled that announcement because they decided it was too many people. And so all these 65-year-olds were thrown into the most confusing week of their lives. In New York, they expanded the eligibility criteria, first to people who are 75, then a few hours later, people who are 65, and a few other categories like teachers or whatever. And they did it because the CDC changed their recommendations because so many states are having issues where the reason their rollout has been so slow is they've been really sort of strict about how they've been administering the vaccines. And the thing is, if we are to all get vaccines over the next few months, you have to just vaccinate whoever's arm is available.
Right.
It is a public health mission. It is not a thing. Like, I understand why you want to give priority access to doctors, but you don't throw out vaccines because doctors aren't taking them. You give them to people even if they're not 75. If you want to give them to 18-year-olds, you give them to whoever's around. And so many states, had such aggressive criteria to make sure that the people who needed the most were getting the most. And I can understand in a system that is organized doing that. But to pretend like this is an organized system is insanity.
It's not, yeah.
You can't have such strict criteria in terms of how in terms of your eligibility criteria, that there aren't too many people to get the vaccines. You need to have so many people eligible to get the vaccines that there is an arm for every vaccine.
Yep.
And so New York had opened it up, and because of that, everything is mobbed and it's chaos trying to get an appointment because it's like 100 websites you have to visit and the appointments open up randomly. And then some of them got canceled and it's been total chaos, but at least they're really burning through their vaccine supply, which is really what you want to do. Because another thing that helps doctors is having fewer patients with coronavirus in the hospital. And one way that you do that is by giving coronavirus vaccines to any old rando who walks down the street. But in LA, where at this point, 1 in 3 people has had coronavirus.
Yep.
They're averaging something like 14,000 cases a day or something. Brent would know
Yep.
better than me because he obsessively checks. But
No,
I
that's about
tried
right.
to check.
I'm sure that is about to go way down because they're turning 2 of our biggest testing sites into
vaccine sites.
So Dodger Stadium and then the huge parking lot at the VA in West LA are both turning into vaccination sites, and so that is where I would assume probably the majority. So like our case count is going to go down, but like I'm sure the positivity rate is going to go up, probably way up, because like people are, but not as many people are going to be able to get tested, and they're probably not going to be able to turn them around as quickly coming from all these different fewer sites.
Me, an insane thing to do, because what they should do, this is, first of all, Black and Latino Angelinos are dying at like twice the rate of everyone else. And also Latinos are getting coronavirus at much higher rates than anyone else. Go to the middle of a Latino neighborhood in LA and set up your site there and let white people drive to there to get the vaccine. Don't put it at the VA between West LA and Beverly Hills, and then, you know, be shocked when everyone who's Latino is still dying of coronavirus. Like, go. I mean, I think
I agree.
That's they're so obsessed with the system being efficient in the ways that they're used to conceiving of public health efficiency that they are not really thinking straight about how to best. I mean, New York City has, I think, been fairly good about this, where they went and found vaccine distribution sites in neighborhoods where they knew that were especially hard hit, and white people are just going to take the subway to them. They're going to get there because the vaccines are there, but you put them in a neighborhood where it's accessible to the people who need them the most. That just is good common sense and good public health practice in a crisis like this. I think LA, I am not surprised by this, because the response has been sort of lax in a lot of ways in LA, in a way that it wasn't in New York, even though Cuomo is very paternalistic and because of that sometimes gets too literal minded. So he had to be like forcibly told he couldn't restrict the vaccines to healthcare workers anymore. Like that, he complains about it every day on social media. And in every interview, he's mad because too many people are eligible now. But it's like, who cares? Give everyone the vaccine and don't worry about it. But in LA, I have been shocked by how slowly these rollouts have been happening, considering that the crisis has just been like unmanageable there for, at this point, like over a month and a half, and maybe 2 months. Like I feel like they almost need someone a little paternalistic in LA to be like, let me take an active role in doing something, as opposed to what it's like a very Southern California approach they're having, where they're like, well, I guess we'll turn Dodger Stadium into a vaccine site. I guess we don't have any vaccines and no one's allowed to have them, but
no, I think you're right. I mean, that was the thing, like, that I think was so weird. And they've got, you know, I think it's good that they are having mass vaccination sites, because like, I think that is a good first step. And actually, you know, Dodger Stadium is not necessarily a bad location to get a lot of Black and brown people to. But it's just such a wild thing. You're absolutely right, where they are still sort of like, even at Dodger Stadium, which I think they're saying that they are going to try and vaccinate like tens of thousands of people like per day, basically, are still, even though the CDC has changed its guidelines and most of the other states in the country have changed its guidelines, are still really just, you know, stubbornly being like, no, it's just healthcare workers right now. And all of there's millions of places around the city where you can get vaccinations. Like, even just like, you know, I'm now, again, by the way, new healthcare, just because once again, you know, all these people who are desperate to get to keep their healthcare through their employer, and then their employer changes their healthcare, you know, every 3 years. Anyway, my new doctor's office is licensed through the county to be giving
a lot of,
you know, and a lot of doctor's offices are, obviously, and a lot of pharmacies are and stuff, but even they on their my doctor's office on their website is like, you know, we're following LA County guidelines to make sure that healthcare workers are prioritized. And like, as you said, I get it, but we need to start vaccinating more people. And also, with all due respect, if you are a healthcare worker and I feel like healthcare workers right now who haven't got it are probably healthcare workers who are choosing to not get it, which you know, I have issues with, and
of course,
like, for various reasons. But I'm also like, look, we've been doing this for pushing a month now. Like, if there are more doses, start sticking them in people.
Well, and the other thing is, I feel like the thing that will drive, and they, I think, are in a position where they can presume on January 20th, the distribution tactics will change. And so I think in New York State, they were sort of just burning through their supply because they were like, something's got to change in the next few weeks. And I think that it's safe to assume that that will be the case, but also it is better to get more people vaccinated more quickly than it is to ensure that every single dose goes to a worthy recipient, because everyone is a worthy recipient of a vaccine that is a public health measure.
Yeah.
It's like, you wouldn't just like, decide that there's not like a priority of which babies get the measles vaccine or the, MMR vaccine. It's just like every baby gets one. You don't worry about when it is because you do it as soon as you can. And, this, like, we don't do this with the flu shot, and it is because there's enough supply that you can go and get it anywhere. Because the other thing they worry about is having enough people to actually give the shots. And I keep being like, if there are enough vaccines, there are plenty of people to give them, because everyone somehow got the flu shot somewhere this year. And was able to do that without any trouble. And maybe it was at their doctor's office, and or maybe it was at a pharmacy, or there were a million places you could go. There are plenty of people who know how to give an injection, and all of those people can just be given vaccines to give out to whichever idiot walks in off the street wanting a vaccine. The supply issue is the issue. But if you can assume that the supplies are going to increase as quickly as possible, which I do think will happen, and B, presume that herd immunity is the goal of vaccines, just as it was the goal of Scott Atlas, but no one has to die with the vaccine herd immunity. But if herd immunity is the goal, then more people vaccinated quickly is better than nobody being vaccinated, or people being vaccinated very slowly and carefully, depending on where they are.
I mean, at the rate that they are moving in Los Angeles, if we're to believe the stat about 1 in 3 people having had COVID, we're going to naturally get to herd immunity before we are going to have vaccinated a bunch of people.
Right. And it's at a certain point, I think it isn't worth holding on to orthodoxies that are not helping get something done quickly in a crisis.
100%.
I think oftentimes a sort of, it's easy, I think, as a governor to feel that that's a compelling thing because you don't want to hear from doctors that they couldn't get it. And I can totally understand that. At a certain point, you just have to be like, we're going to take every dose that we can get from the federal government, and we are going to give out every single dose that we get. And people don't need to be vaccinated twice. So once we vaccinate you, you are done. And so we are just going to slowly work our way through all of these millions of people, and we are going to do it as quickly as we can get the vaccines. That's it. Like, I don't know why LA County backtracked when every other state has opened it to people 65 and older.
I know.
And like,
crazy.
Also, if you can't give them appointments until March, don't, but get them on the books.
Right. I know.
It's madness.
Well, I think part of the problem is they just don't know from the federal government what what sort of resources that they are going to have. The other thing that is crazy about this, and we didn't put the Biden's $1.9 trillion plan in here at this point, but like also what would help states and local governments be able to do this better is if they had some money to be able to do this better.
That's right.
And so hopefully they're going to get that very quickly also. So that will be helpful. Certainly, I'm not saying that LA County is not to blame for some of the slowness of this itself, but also like if LA County had $1 billion from the federal government, then they would also probably be doing it a little bit better than they're doing right now.
Totally. And
if they knew from the federal government how many doses were going to become available to them, like in the next 100 days, which is another thing that the Biden campaign has said that they are going to be open about. I think that like there's just so many unanswered questions that is also, I think, scaring some of these cities and states into being cautious because they just don't know what's going to happen in the future. And hopefully that will be one of the things that they don't even need money to do, really. But
I maintain
have an open conversation about some of these things.
I maintain that just as they did with ventilators, the big states should have called each other and been like, how can we acquire vaccines independent of the federal government?
Totally.
Knowing the federal government wouldn't help them. And what they should have aimed to do was bring as many states into that agreement as possible. So that the states were essentially operating as their own federal government without the help of the federal government, which was not helping them. I mean, I think that's what a smarter situation would have been. I know that that's a crazy thing to have to suggest, but we're in the situation we're in. I know that's the point of the federal government. To have to form a shadow one is a lot of work. But like, I feel like Gavin Newsom should have called Andrew Cuomo and been like, let's go buy some vaccines together.
Yeah.
Like, we are the two states that have been hit the hardest in this situation.
Yeah, we can do this.
And if Massachusetts wants to join, great. But let's go buy some vaccines.
Yep. Yeah.
I say that as if I understand where you buy them from or who you're talking to, but I just feel like get creative if the Trump administration wants to be so difficult. Like, do whatever. And also just give them to everyone. Don't be so obsessed with creating a hierarchy that you lose your chance to some minor level of herd immunity. Even if you gave them to all 20-year-olds, they're the ones spreading it to their grandparents. Like,
seriously.
In any case, in final news, CNN had the most hilarious humble brag ever today on their main page.
Yeah, we bring you reporting from CNN.
Yeah, about how much better their ratings are than Fox's.
Which, look, that's a very Trumpian thing to do. So, like,
CNN first of all, CNN has been up to shenanigans straight through.
The CNN shade is the best of the shade.
Jake Tapper and Dana Bash do not care anymore. Anderson Cooper has lost it. Chris Cuomo and Don Lemon are now just doing bits about Don Lemon being openly Black after that article came out calling him openly Black. And the entire CNN lineup is, and what I kind of like about it, I think, because I've been watching CNN instead of MSNBC, largely because their streaming is better. But I've been saying for years that CNN was better than MSNBC, and I couldn't figure out why, because obviously they're also just reporting infotainment because it's so much shade all the time from them.
Totally.
But what I like about them is that their shade is sort of broadly just the shade that you would have as a reasonable person. It doesn't have there's no investment in any particular wing of Democratic politics. CNN shade is just broad shade, whereas MSNBC shade is about investment in a very corporate wing of Democratic politics. And so they have shade on the right and left.
That's how I feel too. It feels
CNN shade is just towards the right.
Right. It feels to me, especially as a Democrat, for starters, it just feels more newsy, even though maybe
right, it's crazy, but it's still
maybe
newsier.
They should be editorializing less.
But should they be?
But right. I mean, like
anymore. I mean, probably, what is anything anymore?
Probably yes. But I get that, like, all of they also have to have viewers, and that is part of the reason why people are loving watching CNN right now. But like in terms of we've talked about MSNBC a ton right now. The sort of the coalescing of the CNN anchors of the sort of moderate wing of the party with the what's her face who anchors a lot now, who's the former what's her name who used to work for George W. Bush, and all of the Lincoln Project people and the Claire McCaskells of the world, and it's all Joy Reid herself. All of these people are sort of like fashioning themselves. First off, they're being open about being Democrats, right? Which is like, fine. I'd rather you be open about it than just sort of like pretend like.
Right. Well, if you're going to have a news channel entirely premised on how you're all Democrats,
I think they're more. If you were just Joe Blow off the street and you want to watch MSNBC, I'm not going to fight you about it, right? Because you're at least going to be getting sort of like broadly like the right facts. But if you were a Democrat, I would certainly push you away from there, because I think that the brand of Democrat-ness that they are selling has ultimately hurt the party and is not where we want the party to be, because like they are leading the charge on the sort of like making a bed with the moderate Republicans. And that
agreed. And I think CNN, when they do have pundits, they have pundits that are awful on the right, but they also have Alexandra Rojas on the left. Like, they have people who actually do really speak for the progressive wing of the party in a meaningful way, not just in a sort of pundity way, but actually do the work. Those people are disqualified
from being on MSNBC.
Right. Those people don't get to be on MSNBC. And MSNBC oftentimes, if it reports a story about the left wing of the Democratic Party, does not sort of seek to discredit that wing in their reporting, they are currently seeking to discredit the Trump wing of the party. But that's because I think at a certain point they were just like, fuck all of this. But they don't seem to have an agenda beyond just being the sort of entertaining news source that is on 24 hours a day.
Right.
MSNBC's agenda reads so clearly to me that I find it unwatchable.
And it's completely antagonistic to
and it makes you
the
crazy
left.
because it's antagonistic to the left, and then you turn it off and you feel panicked. When I turn off CNN, I'm just like, oh, the news is off, even though it's not real news. I just feel like, okay, well, I've had enough Jake Tapper for tonight. Goodbye. Whereas MSNBC, I turn it off and I feel like in a state of inexplicable panic that I can't articulate how to resolve. Like it is very much like Fox News in that way.
Yep.
Where, it sources news that's specifically designed to antagonize you, and then you panic for the rest of the night.
Yep.
Whereas, if you watch CNN, even an insurrection on CNN, when you turn it off, you're like, whoa, that was crazy. But you don't feel like CNN sold you a weird bill of goods about the insurrection. In any case,
yes.
CNN's own article was entitled Analysis. It's from Brian Stelter. Analysis. TV news is realigning with Fox's ratings sagging and CNN soaring. That's CNN's own headline. And it's basically just an article about how great their ratings are, especially them and MSNBC really cleaned up during the insurrection.
They did. But what's interesting though about the CNN ratings, and this I think is actually a good thing, because we were just talking about like how we don't want people to be watching MSNBC, but it's not as if Fox viewership has gone down and then went to CNN. It wasn't like an X down, Y up type situation, right? It was just less people are watching Fox, because they're discouraged because Trump just watched the election.
Right.
The hardcore Trumpers are going to One American News Network, OWN, and some of them are going to Newsmax. Some of them are going to not watching news at all because they're finding they're making up their own news by being on Parler or
they're
whatever.
on Parler, so they find the news there.
But CNN has really benefited from new viewers who, in the last few months, like since the election, have been looking for something vaguely reliable.
Right.
And I can understand why, if you were looking for that specifically, that you would choose CNN over MSNBC.
It's what I'm
not saying they're way more trustworthy. I don't think that you're getting like incorrect facts on MSNBC or anything like that.
And also, CNN is still sensationalizing the news.
100%.
That's not even, that's not really the conversation. The conversation, I think, is more about like, what do you get out of the news that they sensationalize? Where is your panic directed? How sort of correct? Are you panicking about the right thing? Like, I think CNN, you are more likely to find yourself panicking about the right thing when you turn it off than MSNBC, where you are sort of like a Fox News viewer, where you're just in a generalized state of panic, and you aren't really sure where to focus, but you're mad at everyone, including your own party, but not the people that are actually causing the trouble, which is rich corporate people.
Oh, I inevitably, if I have been watching the news for a long period of time, which I have been obviously for the last couple months,
who hasn't?
And I've texted you and Grant I think a few times when it has happened, I will tire of CNN briefly and go to MSNBC, and Claire McCaskill will, say something that makes me more mad than I had been about the actual news event that I was supposed to be mad about. And then I'm like, okay, well, that took 7 seconds, and now I'm back to CNN. So.
I literally would rather listen to Rick Santorum talk for 5 minutes about something so that I can listen to the rest of CNN's panel than hear one person say anything on MSNBC.
Oh, I know. You have a conversation with Steve Schmidt and Claire McCaskill and some other person who is just all sharing the same corporatist viewpoint about something, claiming to be from different parties but are not. And it's like, this is not additive to the news. I'm not learning anything about the news. I'm not getting an interesting opinion about.
It's been destructive to discourse inside the Democratic Party, I think, because it's made it really difficult to talk about. It makes it really difficult to talk about what are credible criticisms of the Democratic Party that are not shared by MSNBC because they're sponsored by the very people I'm criticizing by making these criticisms. It's hard to talk to other Democrats.
Yeah, it's the MSNBC wing of the party that has made it so easy for politicians in that same wing of the party to thumb their nose to anyone who isn't one of them. And that's why I can't watch it.
It makes it so it's a platform that's created specifically with the goal of antagonizing real progress a lot of the time.
Totally.
Which I feel like with CNN, they're corporate owned. I mean, I'm not trying to tell
Yeah,
you,
right. It's like they're no heroes
they're not heroes here, but they don't have an interest in stopping progress. They just don't always report on it. Like, like they're still representing a corporate point of view, but they don't have an opinion on the details.
Yes.
And you still get the shade that you are looking for when you're trying to watch infotainment anyway.
Right, exactly.
You get all the shade that you want and less of the editorializing. It's but somehow more of the editorializing. It's much
yeah. But I'm glad they're winning because that's, if I had to pick who I would want to win, it would be them. And
I have been in the anti-MSNBC camp for a long time, as Brent knows, and my parents unfortunately know, because I have lectured them quite a bit about this.
Yeah.
And to the extent that they were watching MSNBC for a while in secret and refusing to tell me, and they would turn it off when I called because they didn't want me to hear that they were watching MSNBC. And I feel, and especially the Koronaki lovers were like real mad at me because I was just like, Koronaki is bullshit. I don't trust I trust generally his reporting.
But John King is just as good at the big board as Steve Koronaki is.
Right, is just as good, and there's less editorializing on CNN with the results coming in. They just repeat more of the same boring facts, and MSNBC often tries to interpret those facts incorrectly. But I have been in trouble with all sorts of people because of my hatred of MSNBC for years.
Yeah.
And now I feel like we're finally in an era where people are like starting to like come back.
Oh, I feel like I've been weaning people off of it.
Yeah, no, I feel like we've been talking about this for a while because we've been having to wean everyone off of it.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah. If you are a friend of ours and you are still on MSNBC, we're coming for you.
Get out of there.
Yeah. Get your life right.
Yeah.
In any case, that's the news. Hopefully next week, if all goes according to plan, will be our first podcast in years that is from the not Trump era.
Amazing.
We have made it through 2 full presidencies because we started this podcast during the campaign in 2012.
Yep.
So this is our 8-year anniversary.
Right.
And I cannot wait to not have to talk about Donald Trump again, because I think a lot of podcasts are going to end because a lot of the entertaining things that are going on in the news are going to stop. But you guys should know that we did 4 years of reporting and opinionating, before Trump even came onto the scene.
Yeah.
We know exactly what we're going to do. We don't have any concerns about
There's been so many articles about like what comedians are going to do and what podcasts are going to do and what impersonators are going to do.
Yeah, get ready, you guys, because
we're going to do what we always do.
Exactly. We are in no way going to be out of material. And so get excited about that. Anyway, we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.